Which is that famous name, something.
Good evening. It's my great pleasure to be able to introduce you to a lecture which has been organized by the SOAS China Institute, and the speaker tonight is actually a SOAS person, just on loan in other places. But yes, Dr. Charles Manson is a librarian. Is works for the libraries of the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and also the British Library a few steps away from here, and is thoroughly familiar with our own library collection, not least the Tibetan materials which he has been looking at. I'm extremely happy to see all of you here this evening. I know that some of you have an interest in studies which refer to Inner Asia, and then also the empires of surrounding China and China itself. So it's this is something that, of course, over time changes, and those of you who have experience, who have a professional interest in Tibet will know that it changes shape, and it changes also culturally over time. But I'm going to not say much more than this, and I would like to remind you that any questions that you have, unless they're immediate questions concerning audibility or anything, we should discuss at the end. And I am sure that there will be many questions. I already have a few, just having looked at the book. Yes, of course. I should say a couple of words about the book as well, which is has been authored by Charles Manson, which is copies of which can be inspected here at the desk, and which are probably available at our bookshop too. If not, I'm going to make sure that it will be. And here you have to correct me if I'm mistaken. Did you do an introduction to a Tibetan document which is available on YouTube or on the British Library website?
Yes.
Yes, because I came across that some weeks ago, but I wasn't sure. I wasn't 100% sure about it. Okay, so do search the British Library website, and you will find a wonderful introduction to a Tibetan manuscript. So, having said this, I won't say anything more until the end, and I would like to pass the word to Charles Manson for his lecture.
Good evening. Lovely to see you all here. And thank you for the invitation and for the introduction as well. Very kind introduction. Yes, so the genesis of the living Buddha tradition, and I hope you know the tradition Dalai Lama. So, and where it begins, and we're going to look at that today, because it's, although Karma Pakshi is often called the first reincarnation in terms of the reincarnate lamas, it's not entirely accurate, but it serves as a good marker. If you have to find somebody who you could say is the first reincarnation of the Tibetan tradition, then Karma Pakshi is as good as any. I'm going to end with yes, going to look a little bit at the context, the biography of Karma Pakshi, a little bit at his writings and his legacy. So the biography, the writings, and his legacy are in the book. Some of the writings, anyway. Just I extracted some, and a bit about his significance as well. So firstly, the geographical context. He operated from this area initially for the first half of his life, went into central Tibet, then up here, right into, into West China, and then up to Mongolia, across to Almadik over here, and then right across again to Shangdu or Xanadu. So, and then back to Tibet. So that was quite a lot of traveling, and quite a lot happened in the time. So he was born near Dege here, spent the first half of his life there, went to Tsurpu near Lhasa, and then went, we'll see why shortly, went up to West China, northeast Tibet, and then went up to Karakoram, across to Almadik after some time, and then back along the Silk route, and then was imprisoned, well, captured, should we say. They attempted to execute him, didn't work, and then he was put in exile near Xanadu, Shangdu, and then later was released and came back to his homeland, and then to Tsurpu, where he eventually died. So the historical context, just very briefly, some of you will know it very well, but you may not, some of you may not know, Tibet had an empire, began really in, this is just taking it as a sort of apogee in 820 of the Common Era, began in the 7th century. 630 is a good enough date. So it lasted for about 200 years, and then began to collapse with the assassination of Langdama in 842. And during that time of the Tibetan Empire, they became, certainly from the first emperor, became interested in Buddhism. Buddhism had not come, as far as we know, to Tibet until the 7th century. It got to China in the 2nd century. They went round the mountains and round the Tibetan plateau and came to China. But it didn't really get into Tibet until the 7th century. They had no writing until the 7th century. And the, excuse me, the some of the emperors were interested in Buddhism and some weren't. So it's not all Buddhist situation in the empire all the time. But then in 842, Langdama was assassinated and there was a sort of collapse of central authority. And as far as we know, there wasn't nearly as much interest in Buddhism. It may have just gone down to the village level, perhaps being preserved that way, but it certainly wasn't a court religion anymore. And then there was a revival in the late 10th century, the rekindling of the embers, so to speak. It's a famous quote, where you get, in amongst other monks coming from northeast Tibet to revive the monastic tradition, but you get translators going south to India and then coming back with texts and teachings. It's a huge project that not very well organized. I mean, it was individual translators, but they were interested in transferring Buddhism at the time in India into Tibet. And a certain degree of what are called termas, or rediscovered literature from the imperial period as well. Because you have, between the decline of the empire in 842 until the late 10th century, you've got about 150 years period of, it used to be called dark period, but it's now called the intermediary period. Dark, it doesn't sound so good. And then the monasteries start to be established in the 11th century. And in the meantime, so we go forward another 200 years to when Karma Pakshi actually lived in 1204 to 1283. You've got the invasion of northern India by Islam. So Buddhism rapidly declining in northern India. So this transfer had occurred for about 200 years of Buddhism into Tibet just before it disappeared, well, almost disappeared from India. So it was quite fortuitous in a way. But it was the particular type of Buddhism that existed in the 11th and 12th centuries. And we have in the 13th century the death of further north of Tibet, Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan. So you've got this sort of world, and you've got the two Song empires as well, the two Song divisions, China. This is the world in which Karma Pakshi was born into. So here, just a sample of some of the monasteries that start to be created in this rekindling period from 1000 until Karma Pakshi's birth. Tuling, probably it is the earliest. The other one that's very important to Karma Pakshi is Tsurpu and Katok. He had some education. There are also some lesser monasteries in this area that were also important to him. This is the area, there's Katok again, and there's there again, that he grew up in and spent the first half of his life. And these monasteries here, Karmagan, Kampunenang, and Pangpuk, were important to him much later on, once he'd become established. He helped revive them from his previous incarnation, which it had been quite a long time since the previous incarnation had died, and so the monasteries have become somewhat dilapidated. Markham is put in there because it's important. It's where his teacher died, and if you just remember that for that. And the Mount Kawakapo, that's as far south as he went, this area. It's a sacred mountain. Did a circumambulation pilgrimage there at one time. And here, this is previous incarnation. We haven't got there yet. And I'm just giving the geography, really, so we get the idea of, this is all huge mountains here. The and main rivers of Asia, several of the main rivers of Asia. And then Batam, near there, just northeast of it, is where he spent many years in retreat as well. So if you just try to, those geographical elements. So there is his dates, 1204 to 1283. Sometimes his date is given as 1206. I personally go for 1204. The historical writer who gave 1206 tended to get his dates wrong. But that was in the 17th century. This is an idea of near where he was born, on the upper banks of the Yangtze River. And by the age of 6, he was able to read without being taught, apparently. It's slightly unusual to be able to read in those times, one would imagine. And very shortly, he was able to read Buddhist scriptures, not the easiest of reading. And he actually became, he would be employed, so to speak, or there would be exchange of goods. He would go around houses and read scriptures. It was a virtuous activity to have scripture read in your house, and he would then receive food, cloth. So he was part of that economy. But by the age of 11, he decided to go to central Tibet to gain some learning. But he didn't get very far. Just south of Chandor, if you remember where Dergi was, and then you start going in towards central Tibet, and then just south of Chandor, he met on a hillside a person called Pomdrak, who's a teacher of the area, and they, for some reason, he decided to, well, he just met him, and then that evening, Pomdrakpa gave an initiation. And after the initiation, he called this child to him, the 11-year-old, and said, during that initiation, I had several visions of you being surrounded by the figure of this painting, but the figure of Dusun Khenpa, who had died quite some years earlier. We're in about 1210 now, sorry, 1215, because he's 11 years old. So he died 20 odd years ago. And he said, you must have some karmic connection there. Didn't use the word karmic, but you had a karma connection there. And he said, can you stay with me? And so Karma Pakshi decided to stay with him and take some teaching on meditation and so forth, rather than go into central Tibet. So this is a picture of Pomdrakpa. Now Pomdrakpa, as far as I know, never actually met Dusun Khenpa, but he was the disciple of Drugden Rechen, who was the disciple of Dusun Khenpa. So you've got a sort of grandson disciple here, saying to Karma Pakshi, this child, you are the reincarnation, or you have a karmic connection to my sort of grandfather guru, in a way. So there's quite a distance in terms of time, anyway. And I think that this is working. I think that we can say that, well, I would say that this is the first stage of the reincarnation development within Karma Pakshi's life. There are 3 stages, really. We'll see them come up. And this is the recognition of the karma connection to the predecessor. So Dusun Khenpa, he is now called the first Karmapa, but he was never called Karmapa in his lifetime. Karma Pakshi refers to himself as Karmapa quite a few times. And then later on, well, even the 3rd Karmapa was not called Karmapa. It was only when the 4th came along that it became a sort of institutionalized name. But they have retrospectively assigned the name Karmapa to Dusun Khenpa. So this is the sort of first stage during his life when he was a child. Now the teachings he received from Pomdrakpa were on Saraha, his Doha, the Doha of the king, the Doha of the queen, and the Doha of the people, which are basically songs of instruction. They were really quite popular in Tibet. And he also received the Mahamudra instruction of Gampopa. So this is in the Kagyu tradition, the oral lineage tradition. Gampopa, the student of Milarepa, some of you may know Milarepa. And he also received a teaching on the introduction to the 3 kayas, which does involve a certain amount of yoga as well. Very little, but it's mostly a guru yoga. And this was the teaching that later Karma Pakshi would use quite a lot. He taught both Kublai Khan and Mongol Khan this teaching. It was very popular. He was very keen on it, and he would give it publicly as well on his travels. It was his main teaching. It's really the only one that he mentions. Is, I gave this teaching to people. He gave various initiations as well. So a bit later on, roughly when he was 18 or 20, he went for, I don't know the exact date, but he went for ordination and further training, more intellectual training in Katok. Remember where Katok was? It's on the map. And this is not a Kagyu monastery, it's a Nyingma monastery. So they have connections back to the Tibetan Empire time, before the rekindling. And actually, Karma Pakshi seemed to be fairly easygoing about the differences between the 2. He refers to Mahamudra and Dzogchen as being 2 different names, but the same meaning. Dzogchen relates to the Nyingma, it's sort of the ultimate state of the Nyingma, and Mahamudra for the Kagyu, and he's saying that they're 2 different names, but the same meaning. And In fact, in one of his longer works, which refers to hundreds of tantras, roughly half of the tantras would be Kagyu, Sama tantras, and half Nyingma tantras. So he doesn't seem to have made much distinction in those terms. He was very much a Kagyu later on when he took over the monasteries too. So he spent some time there, and then, see up in Katok here, and then he went back to his teacher in this area, and they decided to go down to Markham. And it was because Mongols, they were escaping or avoiding, shall we say, a Mongol invasion. Now, it's not clear where the Mongols were, the forces, but they may have been coming down the east side of Tibet, West China, perhaps trying to get into China further down by going along where the mountains meet the plain. Anyway, they went down to Markham, and unfortunately, Pom Drakpa, his teacher, then died. And he seems, Karma Pakshi, to have been somewhat despondent at this time and a little bit unsure about what to do. And after a while, he had several visions at the time, and one of them told him to go east. And much of his life was governed by visions. He would have a vision and then tell him to go somewhere, and he would do so. And he went actually up to near Batang here and found a spot just northeast of it. And this purports to be the ruins of the buildings that he initiated when he began his retreat there. And he spent some years there, 11 years there, and after a while, he began to collect students around. As many as 500 people would hear stories of his miraculous powers, that there was a great yogi living up on the top of the hill. We can see here, it's up on the top here. Here's another angle of the ruins there. And this is where, look, you see Batang there, and it's actually just up there. Bitang is over here. Now, while he was in retreat, he had a this time, a visionary dream. And his Dakinis came to him. Dakinis are like female spiritual beings. And they sort of challenged him to say, can you sing the Mani mantra, the Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of Avalokiteshvara, which is the god of compassion, or love and compassion, to put it simply. Om Mani Padme Hum. And so he sang it to them, and they said, no, you're not singing it right. And so they actually sang it to him in a particular tune. And he apparently memorized it, and then would tell people, they told these Dakinis told him that it would be very beneficial for people. And so it was another one of the things that he spread about. Now, it did seem to, and we have references to it in the 16th century, that it was quite widespread amongst communities. People do communally sing this mantra. And but it doesn't seem to have made its way into modern times very well. But I found that there was a Lama Nola, who said that he knew the tune. He was he had a reputation for being a good chanter. And he, in the 2000s, 2007, I think, 6, he sang it, and I recorded it, and then our illustrious composer here transcribed it for me here. And then I asked a medieval musician, it's no connection, but he plays it on a Western instrument, but just to give you an idea of the tune. Well, I heard somebody say uncle. That's right. So he spent several years in Hungary, up here, and then after retreat, he decided to leave retreat. He got all his students surrounding him, so to speak, well, engaged with him. He decided to start going around several of Dusum Khenpa's monasteries, which had been, this is when they were founded. So it's quite a long time, it's 100 years later that he starts, well, 80 years in some cases, but he starts 120, sorry, or 80. Starts going around and repairing. So it's almost as though he's taking on the responsibility of the what Dusum Khenpa had established in his lifetime. And the monasteries were, what should we say, ravaged during the Great Cultural Revolution, and they've since been restored. But that gives you an idea of what they might have looked like back in the day. And he did do quite a lot of restoring monasteries. He didn't necessarily make new monasteries very much. He did a few, but he was quite keen on restoring buildings. And also, when he did his travels further into Mongolian areas, quite a few Buddhist structures had been damaged as well, and he would repair and restore them too. So while he was at Karma here, which, if you remember, was sort of northwestish a bit of the earlier map, two young monks from the Shangshung area in West Tibet came to him and asked him to come to Tsurpu, which was the main monastery that Dusum Khenpa had established in central Tibet, near Lhasa. He'd established it in 1189, and then he died in 1193. And he agreed. So it's even further taking over the mantle of the monastery. Now here we have a picture before destruction in the 60s by Hugh Richardson, and it's not necessarily the size that it might have been in Karma Pakshi's day, but it gives you some idea of the building. And actually, as we'll see later, Karma Pakshi built a statue that was 60 feet high. That's 6 stories high. So, and indoors. So it must have been quite a tall building already, or perhaps he extended it to make it tall. So when he got to Tsurpu, he actually found it somewhat dilapidated. It'd been quite a while since Dusum Khenpa had died, and not only that, but the Sangha had become somewhat loose. They'd started drinking, and so he both revived the buildings and the Sangha, and he was there for about 6 years. Meanwhile, over in China, West China. Kublai Khan, northwest China, Kublai Khan had decided to lead an expedition down the east side of Tibet, down into the Dali kingdom. And it was quite a rapid expedition because he didn't meet much resistance. He got down to Dali, the king, the local ruler, almost immediately surrendered. And then Karma Pakshi started going back up to his homeland. Sorry, not Karma Pakshi. Kublai Khan started going back up to his homeland. So in the journey down and up, somewhere along the way, he heard about this unusual, miraculous yogi. And he sent a messenger right across into central Tibet who managed to find Karma Pakshi and invited him to come to his court. Kublai Khan was not emperor then. He was the eldest brother of the ruling emperor at the time. It was Mongol. The eldest brother, yes, he was the second brother. And when the messengers got to Tsopu and invited him, Karma Pakshi had severe doubts about going. Remember, he'd run away, so to speak, from the Mongols earlier in East Tibet. And so, should I go, should I not? He actually writes in his biography. And then, of course, he has a vision. And it tells him that if he does go, it will be beneficial. So he decides to go, and you can imagine what the local Sangha must have thought. He'd come, he'd started to revive the monastery. It was quite a thing to have this very adept meditator and teacher with them, and then he suddenly decides to go. Anyway, he did make his way, and he met Kublai Khan, I think, up in northwest Tibet, sort of Western China, not in Tibet, but just beyond there. And he was well received in the court initially, and he gave Kublai Khan some instruction on the bodhisattva vow, bodhicitta, should we say, instruction, and things really went quite well to start with. But Karma Pakshi had a premonition that there was going to be trouble at the court at some point. There would be some degree of conflict. So he decided to leave, which was quite an unusual move, shall we say, and it upset Kublai Khan quite a bit, as we'll see later. He sort of retaliated. And he continued to spend time in that area up here. He established a monastery. It was built, apparently the building was built in 108 days, somewhat miraculously, and he gave teachings, and he does mention a wall as well, so it must have presumably seen one of the Great China walls. And then he was near a place called Tsongkha, which coincidentally is where the current Dalai Lama was born. And he received messengers from Mongol Khan, who's up in Karakoram. He's the Khan of Khans. Mongol Khan had been way over. He'd been in Kiev at one time. He'd been right over, probably as far as Hungary. So he was quite a warrior. But he was now the emperor, so to speak, of the Mongolian emperor and the chief amongst the Khans. And he'd issued this invitation to Karma Pakshi to come and visit him. Karma Pakshi had no doubts this time, or he doesn't express in his memoirs anyway. So he proceeded to cross the desert here and approached Karakoram, and he met Mongol Khan near Karakoram. Now, as he was approaching Karakoram, there's the second stage of, as I would put it, the reincarnation development within his lifetime. And what happened was that Husum Kempa, the prior incarnation, had spoken, Dusum Kempa means knower of the three times. So he had a reputation for knowing the past, the present, and the future. And he had a reputation for telling about his past lives as well. And he'd spoken to disciples about this, different disciples, and there are at least 3 accounts of him speaking about this. And at one point, as disciples would, they would say, well, when you're going to die, where are you going to be reborn? They want to know where he's going to be reborn. So he gave, not entirely precisely, but he gave some examples. He gave 3 examples of where he would be reborn, one down in India, one in the West. And the third one was, I will be reborn for the sake of one person, which is very unusual. For you've got the Buddhist idea that if you're going to influence your next birth, then you would, all your Buddhist practice is in order to help enlighten all beings. So to say that you are going to be reincarnated in order to help one being seems contradictory. And the other incarnations obviously weren't Karma Pakshi. So you can imagine this was a bit of a puzzle. Why, he said this, and yet it hasn't happened. Well, as he approached Karakoram, it was then that he realized, and I presume a little bit, that he saw the sort of splendid nature of Mongol Khan's court. He realized that, oh, I was actually Mongol Khan that I have been reborn for, so to speak. Because if you can convert an emperor, then it has a huge influence over many other people. That is the intimation that he had as he approached Karakoram. So his meeting with Mongol Khan was, it was a bit unusual to start with, but it was harmonious. There was a bit of thunder and lightning, and everybody sort of thinks, oh, what's going on? And he's just crossed the desert, more or less. Well, we don't know how many people with him, but not many. And he gets an audience with this grand emperor. And once, I'll read from the book here, page 63. Once Karma Pakshi had gained his first audience with the Earth Protector King, the emperor commanded, I am the ruler of the world. Get rid of my obstacles. Karma Pakshi replied, tonight, I'll think about it a bit. It's a somewhat brave reply to make in front of a warrior emperor. In the morning of the next day, Karma Pakshi again had access to Emperor Mongol and gave his recommendations as recounted in verse. Indeed, in this imperfect world, never will there be a king like you, whatever any astrologers have said. I myself, Karma Pakshi, seek to counteract your obstacles, benefit the Buddha's teaching and all beings, distribute food and wealth throughout the kingdom, repair the residences of the lamas, and make sky offerings with no sense of loss. Again and again, I ask you to set free the prisoners kept in the prisons. So he made several sort of social policy requests of Mongol Khan, and according to Karma Pakshi anyway, Mongol Khan took them up. He actually gave from the treasury, distributed food and wealth. He did repair monasteries. He actually helped in the establishment of a monastery, of a temple in Karakoram, to make bountiful sky offerings. It's the Tibetan reference to Bodleian tradition. And he set, Mongol Khan set 3 prisoners as many as 13 times. It may not necessarily have been criminals, it may have been hostages from war as well. But he actually claims that he followed all of these things. He also prohibited cattle slaughter and hunting on certain days of the month. The 8th, the 10th, the 15th, and the 23rd. This we actually, so it would seem that that indicates that Karma Pakshi had some vegetarian leanings, perhaps, I don't know. But you can imagine getting a Mongolian court to not hunt and slaughter 4 days a month. And there is some external evidence, apart from Karma Pakshi, of this. Cleves, Francis Cleves, found this, although he was writing about an inscription in 1240, towards the end of the article, he refers here to the secret, if they are judged, to that they shouldn't kill as well. There we go, the 8th, 15th, 20th, the first day, slightly different. And the Munkiev as well, a few years later, included it, referred to this inscription. The Mongol's court, well, not of course, but it had Europeans as well. Famous William Boucher, Parisian jeweler, made this is just, there's no example of it, but this is somebody's imagination in the 18th century. But this, many people talked about it, wrote about it. A fountain that had 4 ways of distributing alcohol. Karma Pakshi refers at one point to being in the court with Monge and Arakpoki, who was the youngest. And they were drinking, and Karma Pakshi was invited to join in. And he says that he drank, and he drank them dry. I drank the whole court dry. So maybe it was one of these, I'm conjecturing here, maybe one of the fountain things that he drank dry. He said that it didn't affect him at all. It was like water into water. And he then proceeded to, they all thought this was slightly miraculous, that he wasn't very drunk. And he then gave the Chakrasavara initiation to the Mongol court. And he also gave Mahamudra instruction to Monge. Apparently he was a good meditator, according to Karma Pakshi, and several other initiations and instructions. It's detailed in the book. But of course, Monge is still a warrior, even though he's dabbling, shall we say, with his Buddhist teacher. And he was setting in motion the idea of conquering China. His grandfather, Genghis Khan, had attempted it, had died in the attempt in 1227. So now we're into 1257, 30 years later. Monge is gathering forces to go south. Karma Pakshi decides to leave, and he goes across to the Chagatai capital over at Almanek to see the Khan there. It was a regency, really. It was the mother that was more in charge. And they were more interested in Islam, actually. So he doesn't mention much of what goes on there. And he doesn't seem to have had much success. He didn't, as a teacher, he didn't stay very long. And then he proceeded, he went to possibly Kucha, possibly Turfan. I personally think it's Kucha more. And he spent 8 months there, began writing there as well. And while he was there, he had an important dream, important for him anyway, that a huge Buddha spoke to him and said, you must build a statue same size as me. This is the 60-foot statue that he mentioned. And it seemed to have affected him quite strongly because many years later, when he eventually got back to Tibet, he actually set about doing this, even though he was quite old by then. So he proceeded along Silk route, and then he met up with Mongi Khan in the Liupanshan, excuse my pronunciation, mountains again. And again, a harmonious meeting, and he asked that he could leave to go to Tibet. By now, he'd been given quite a lot of silver by Mongi, and he must have got quite a big sort of entourage of just for the animals to carry it, I suppose. And he wanted to go and use it in the monasteries in his homeland and in central Tibet to make them even grander, I suppose. And Mongi was quite willing to let him get, he was engaged in, about to start fighting a lot. And they parted, and Karma Pakshi spent some time in this area, again, preaching and so forth. And in meanwhile, Mongi went further south, and he died in 1259, in the summer, from disease. So being reincarnated for the sake of one person didn't, unfortunately, lead to much effect in terms of the influence with Mongi. But it may have planted the seeds later for the way that Mongolia went with the religion. But anyway, after Mongi died, there was competition between the youngest brother, Arik Burki, up in Karakoram, and Kublai Khan here in northern China. And something of a civil war started in 1260. And because Karma Pakshi had been up in Karakoram, been popular at the court of Mongi and Arik Burki, Kublai Khan took up against him. He thought, for some reason, that he was on the side of Arik Burki. And also there was the fact that he'd left and annoyed him very greatly, something like 10 years earlier. Well, not 10, 5 years earlier. So he had him, arrested and attempted to have him killed. And for some reason, it becomes quite legendary, but he escaped being killed. Kept on being, they would try various different ways of killing him, and each time it didn't work. To the extent that eventually the executioner committed suicide. He was so upset. Unfortunately. And so Kublai Khan decided to punish him or restrict him, shall we say, by sending him into internal exile up here. And it could be on this coastline here. It's certainly on the edge of either a lake or a sea. It's hard to tell. And there are islands, and there are some islands here. But there is Karma Pakshi does mention quite specifically that it's a very barren area. So there is a big lake up near Shangdu and Zandu, and the Dalai Nur, which is here's a picture of Zandu, drone picture. What it is. Surrounding the lake is volcanic rock, and it's very barren and desolate. So he spent there in this area, and he spent some time on an island there as well. And no trees, he said, as well. So, this is a modern picture. It does seem to be quite barren. He spent 2 years there, but he didn't waste his time. He did quite a bit of writing. A bit more than 2 years. By the time the civil war was over, then Kublai Khan then had him released. And he came, got the wrong name. He came down near, what was eventually built as Beijing. There were buildings there, but what we know as Beijing hadn't been built. It was near Beijing, southwest of it. And he had him imprisoned there in a temple, and the doors bolted, nails in the doors, put a guard on in shifts. This is actually detailed, but he still managed to get out. And he was then brought before Kublai Khan, and because of this somewhat miraculous event, the Kublai Khan then completely relented and asked him to be his teacher. It looks like Karma Pakshi had had enough because he said, no, thanks, I want to go home. And Kublai Khan, again, change of heart, he said, please do go, and wherever you go, pray for me. So it was like a complete change of heart after all this trouble. So Karma Pakshi set off, and it took him quite a while, doing a sort of missionary tour, shall we say. Came down to Dege area, helped some of the monasteries here, built statues. He's quite a wealthy man right now. Goes back to Tsurpo and starts to build this 60-foot statue, which technically must have been quite difficult area. It got destroyed in the Cultural Revolution, unfortunately. Richardson saw it, but he didn't photograph it. The 1240s. So then we get to really the third stage of the reincarnation points in his lifetime, and it's the preparation for both the child that's to come, so to speak, and the continuity of the lineage of teaching. So aside from building this statue, when the statue got built, it almost immediately, one would assume, became quite well known. Where are you going to find in the medieval world 60-foot metal statue? Those ones in Japan, they're about half the height, but they still exist. This is 60 feet. So it fairly quickly seems to have become a pilgrimage point. You would go and see it. Now, a party from southern Tibet, near the north side of the Himalayas, came on pilgrimage, and amongst them was a potter and his wife, a itinerant potter. And they came and they wished to see the statue, gain blessings, and so forth from the teacher. And at one point, Karma Pakshi called aside this potter. It actually mentions, on the path outside the circle. So it really was quite a sign. And he said to him, I'd like to ask you to loan me your house sometime. And the potter thought, this is very strange. This great teacher coming to me and said, wants to borrow the house. So he went back to his party and said to them, this great teacher is asked to borrow my house. And they burst out laughing because he's an itinerant potter. He has no house. So it was a great puzzle. And actually, the next year, a child was born to his wife, potter's wife. And that was the child that the person who was looking for the next incarnation said that it was the next incarnation. So it seems that he was setting it up in a way. Either he knew that she was pregnant, or that he was intimating that she would become pregnant in that way. The teacher who found the next child was Ugyempa, and he was a great yogi. He came to visit Karma Pakshi, and he spent just 3 days there, and he received transmission, what they call the mind-to-mind transmission, and he was taught the tune, the Mani tune that we heard, and also received a Avalokiteshvara initiation as well. And during that, this mind-to-mind transmission, which would help preserve the tradition as general. A little while later, Karma Pakshi seems to have had a stroke. He couldn't talk, he had to be helped. And then he recovered somewhat, as far as we can tell, and then eventually he died in Serbia. So the next Karmapa is actually, there is a book about him in the same series. You can see the same kind of design. And I think she's talking, Ruth Gamble is talking in London, no, it's on Zoom, she's in Australia, but with the Shangchun, either later this month or next month. I think it's later this month. So you might wish to catch that. She has translated, she found and translated, well, it was in plain sight, really. She brought it to attention. The third Karmapa is writing about his transition in the intermediary period between death and his next life. So it's quite interesting. It's quite unusual. It's yeah. Surprised that not more has been made of it yet, but anyway, that's quite interesting. So in the book, in this book about the second Karmapa, you'll see the various chapters. What he's talking about his previous incarnations, about meditation, some examples of his verse and his prose, his conversations with Manjusri, like a vision, his reflections on Tantra, his musings on consecration. He was very keen on consecration and he gives reasons why it's important as well. And then song, verse, poem about for a disciple. An account of his deathbed song, not by him, of course, but actually it comes from much later, but I included it because it's quite useful. And an account of his verse autobiography. We don't have the original, but it's contained within a later history. So I thought that that would be worthwhile. His own autobiography written in verse. And this is an example. This is the memoirs manuscript that I mostly worked from on this. You can see it's here. This is where it now is. You can't get access to it. There's political difficulties, but it was sort of copied in 1978 and been issued, and it's been available as a copy. But the actual manuscript, this black here is the black part of the text, and then the writing, which comes out white here, is actually in silver. I found somebody who'd seen it before it started, and said it was silver. And it's in three main parts. Some in verse. The part A has several sections as well. Each part has certain characters illustrated, and yeah, it's a bit. I call it memoir rather than autobiography because it goes around quite a bit. It's not like a linear description, so it's quite complicated. I also found in 2010 a text which has, it's not directly by him, but apparently he spoke about his previous incarnations. He does in his memoirs as well, but not so much. And here, there's quite a few previous incarnations talked about. And this, we heard on this page here, says, we heard this from the precious Lord Jetson's mouth. So the person who wrote it apparently heard it directly from him. It's a report, basically. Yes, Yeltsin. So this quite fun there. I found this in Halkong Monastery. Actually, it was in a kitchen. There's a fridge. It was a lama's kitchen, and I was sleeping in the kitchen, and I thought, oh, I'll have a look through those books. And there it was. It was part of. Yeah, it's quite short. It was part of this. So that was quite fortunate. Yeah, that's just the details there. he was a student of the third Karma that wrote it, but apparently he knew the second. Claims to have heard it directly from it. Another work that was quite useful, and I'm currently working on as well, is the songs of Karma Pakshi, which I didn't know about at all. And in the process of writing and publication and so forth, we had the pandemic, so everything sort of slows down, goes on hold. And I was twiddling around the internet, as you do, and I found that actually in Oxford, they have a reproduction of this. It's a reproduction from 2015. The original is somewhere either in Chengdu or near Chengdu. And I'd never heard of this before. And so I was able to include perhaps a dozen of the poems in the book. So in a way, it was quite fortuitous, the delay. And they're not, yeah. It doesn't, there's where it's SOAS and library here, not this building, here, where it is. It was quite fortuitous. They're known as Vajra songs, and it's 59 songs, and they often refer, they don't refer to Karma Pakshi so much as the Lama circle. It is Karma Pakshi. And it makes quite a lot of references to Saraha, the 8th century yogin. You remember that's who we received teaching. They don't necessarily say where the songs were sung or created, unfortunately. So I've introduced them into the book. If they're talking about something that seems to relate to a particular subject or a place, then I put them in there. I've taken a bit of license there to associate particular songs. I hope to get them all translated when I get time. So the complete works of Karma Pakshi, at the moment we have something like 40 of them. I'm not going to go into much detail here, but what he's famous for is this series, Limitless Ocean, Jamso Tai series of works. 19, half of them are part of this series. And it was quite structured. You can see very early on, he's talking about this Jamso Tai, this limitless ocean, that limitless ocean, deriving from there. This is quite early on. So it wasn't so much that he just wrote a load of books and include limitless ocean in the title. He'd actually got it sort of planned out from very early on. And there's some examples of what is a limitless ocean are. A limitless ocean of teaching, of the excellent, and so forth, like that, just to give you an idea there. And for further, often they're extracting the essence, the limitless ocean of extracting the essence. The limitless ocean derived from love, with instructions on the subtle winds, prana. And this is the one where he had a debate with Manjusri in a vision, eliminating the 21 wrong views. It turns out to be 24, actually. But and I give the questions. I don't give all the answers. It's a very long text in the book as well of this debate. And then, of course, the limitless assertion of realization, the fruition of all these books. So that's how his work, he structured it. So, and then we go into more modern times. There are two main Karma traditions that found treasures. Some of you will know the word Karma, that are quite important for even nowadays for Buddhist practitioners. In the 17th century, there was Yongye Mingyur Rinpoche. Some of you will know there's a Yongye Mingyur Rinpoche currently. He's going to be in Edinburgh in June. He's become very well known as a good teacher now. But the first Yongye Mingyur Rinpoche had a vision of Karma Pakshi, and the instruction and then the whole practice involved with it has become a core practice for the Kagyu tradition. And in fact, when the 16th Karmapa arrived in, this is the author, arrived in the West in the 70s, everywhere he went, he said, do the Karma Pakshi practice. But it was particularly useful for Westerners. So that derives from the 17th century, and it's a sort of Karmapa guru. And then in 1968, the famous Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, he was in Bhutan, and he had a vision, and out of this came a practice called the sadhana of Mahamudra. And this is what the Shambhala organization that he founded. But apparently they don't use it nearly as much nowadays. But they did use it. Well, I don't know much about it. It's different to this publisher Shambhala. Then there's a group called they're different entities. Just the same name, a bit like Dzogchen. And that was in 1968. He had it translated, came back to Scotland, people started practicing, and he went to America and they started practicing as well. So that's derived from a vision of Karma Pakshi as well. So there's Yogi Mingyo. So this is in 2022. He's still, he's giving initiations of the Karma Pakshi practice. It's been translated into Chinese, and that's a tanka of what's involved in the meditation for it. See, he's got the beard there. There's the beard. It's the only Karmapa that had. Well, no Karmapa after him had a beard. Apparently, we don't have photographs, but from the paintings. And this is the 1968. Well, this isn't it. This is what was printed later. Late 80s, I think. The sadhana of Mahamudra. And there's the visualization there, derived from vision. So there we have it. He had, a life of 70-odd years, met two emperors, gave some Buddhist instruction to both of them, but, well, I suppose Kublai Khan later, Kublai Khan also had instruction from Pakpa, Tibetan, and perhaps paid more attention to him later on. I think it seems like in the early days when it was harmonious between them, when they first met, and it was Kublai Khan that was really interested in Karma Pakshi, and that it was Chabi, his wife, who was more interested in Pakpa, the younger teacher. It's hard to tell. And there is also you've got from the 13th century right up until modern times, for 800 years, this tradition has continued. So there have been 17 Karmapas now. If you look at the popes, there's been over 2,000 years, there's been 200 odd. So, but they wait for somebody to die, and then they elect somebody inspired by prayers and so forth. They elect somebody, but it's always an old person. So you're going to get much quicker repetition, so to speak, if you're looking at continuity of the tradition. With the Karmapas and then the other reincarnations, the tradition, it goes to a child. And so when it was a child after Karma Pakshi, that was the first time that it was actually a very young child. It wasn't really thought of as being reincarnation until he was 11. And it's really, I think, by the time of the fourth Karmapa that it's like beginning to really get established. And it spread, the idea spread right across Tibet and eventually up into Mongolia as well. This idea of transferring authority, both of the monastery and the teaching, to a child, and then bringing up the child and then assuming the full authority when they're about 16. So he was very influential on that. And also this fact that he was both Nyingma and Kagyu, so to speak, that was quite it was then alleged later that he was very influential. He was a source of inspiration, shall we say, to the Rime movement of the 19th century, because they were looking back to Karma Pakshi of the 16th century, and he had written that Karma Pakshi was an inspiration to him, that the fact of being non-sectarian. So perhaps he had some influence in that way at a great distance as well. And of course, these two practices, which nowadays all round, I don't want to give an impression of huge numbers, but there are Buddhist, Kagyu Buddhist centers around North America, Europe, Australia, South America, Russia. You know, it has extraordinary spreading from him coming in the 70s. And this all derives from Karma Pakshi. So it's quite an important person from that point, from this particular phenomenon of the reincarnate lamas. Because after him, 1642, you always seem to get these 42 dates, 1842, 1642. That's when the fifth Dalai Lama becomes the sort of governor of Tibet 400 years later. And then they ruled Tibet for 300 years. That whole idea of reincarnation starts, reincarnate lamas taking over authority starts with Karma Pakshi. I think my voice is going dry and I'd better stop there.
Yes. Thank you very much for this inspiring and quite exhausting in both senses. Also because you had to speak against the SOAS population, but they're just next door. But in any case, I have questions almost for every slide, but I think I first pass the word to the audience. So if you have specific questions, pass, please. Maybe we can collect, but who wants to go first?
I don't have a question, but I did look up the date. That lecture you referred to is this Saturday night.
Ah, which Ruth Gamble.
Yes, that's
Oh
right.
gosh, is that soon? Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Online.
So you can jump to third comer in a week. Yes, great. It's online.
What's the statue of in Sorpo?
Oh, I'm sorry, it was a Buddha. Yes.
Which one, do you know?
Sakyamuni Buddha. Yes. He, in the dream, he sees this huge Buddha, golden Buddha, who speaks to him and says, "Build something like me." Yes. Think of the complications of doing it. You see where Sorpo is if you look at the valley online. They had to get metal, the ore. They had to get it to a certain temperature. You need coal or charcoal. And then to actually have that controlled, to build something that big, is really quite something. Gives a little bit of comparison to the Eiffel Tower, just to give an idea of, not the Eiffel Tower, sorry, the Statue of Liberty.
Do you know who were the workmen? You know?
I was, well, we don't know exactly, but I suspect it may have been Nepalese. The experts, yeah. And it may well have been Recluse rather than Class, not sure. People, I've been told since that people have various bits of it that was exploded and destroyed, and they keep it as relics. So I'd like to see, you could probably tell how it was made from that, but that would be quite interesting. The one they've then replaced now, a smaller one, after things got better again, and that's about 40 feet high. And I actually heard it being made, and that was done by Recluse. It's like really loud, but I didn't see it finished.
You mean you have a technically speaking, it's a slab of iron that's been hammered into shape.
Yes, yeah,
Yes.
sheet
Sheet,
metal,
yes,
and then it gets hammered, yeah. The technical ability must be fantastic.
Yes.
You keep control over that size. Some of the workers, there was disputes, there were a lot of, caused some obstacles. And apparently the disputes even spread into the kitchens, as well. So he said he does refer to the obstacles and then eventually the bedpot. It was famous very much to the whole area.
Very much for lecture, wonderful lecture. I'm interested in two concepts you just not used. One is a Tibetan empire. I'm just wondering why you use the term empire instead of kingdom.
Yeah, well, it started in the Yarlung area, the sort of southeast of Tibet, of Lhasa. And if you've got one kingdom there, and then they start taking over other kingdoms, that's how we think of as an empire. They start to take over, it's a unity of several different kingdoms.
So since it is an empire, and you also use another term, East Tibet.
Yes.
But as traditionally we call that area Khams, Khams.
Yes, come.
Khams
Yes.
instead of East Tibet because it was used in the modern times,
Yes.
mainly by Westerners.
Yes, yes, I would agree. I would have used come, but people don't necessarily know the geography of, and so I think East Tibet is quite reasonable.
Easier to
Yes,
understand.
yes. But there's Kham and there's Amdo as well.
Yeah.
Further up.
Our speaker comes from Chengdu, by the way.
Oh,
It's
Also,
not far away from. Yes.
some research about her.
Oh,
So
really?
Just, yeah.
Oh, it's an interesting place. Yes.
Very
Yes,
interesting.
yes.
Into that.
Yes, yes. Well, next time you might find something. It's quite a climb up. Yeah.
And also.
Yes. Yes.
Name of place, Katok, K-A-T-O-K.
Yes.
I don't know what is Chinese name for this place.
Chinese.
嘎多寺，就是在泰民，对吧？那个嘎是泰民。I noticed just now, just between Dege and
Yes.
Kata.
Yes, it is. It's about halfway between.
Chinese, so we call it Chinese.
Chinese.
Understand?
Okay.
I see.
Yeah, there's quite a few monasteries down there, where the river goes down between Dege and Batam.
Huiyuans, and it is also called Huiyuans.
Oh,
Chinese.
the Katok is.
Yeah.
A question to the language. So when you read it, how much has it changed compared to today?
Well, today I was working on in the British Library.
Yes.
I've been looking at some manuscripts, and I get a bit blasé. Don't tell anybody. But I mean, I'm careful, of course. But these are Dunhuang material,
Yeah.
and so everything there is more than 1,000 years old. So you're just reading it, and thinking, why couldn't you write clearer? And but what's written there is the same, very much the same. I can read it. I haven't done any special study of ancient Tibetan or anything. It's just modern Tibetan, and you can read it. It's more or less the same. It's not exactly the same. Modern Tibetan has changed a little bit since 1959 for obvious reasons. But before that, you can read 19th century. You can read 12th century. It's very easy. You try doing that in English, you can't read.
That's what I
So Shakespeare is hard. You go back to Chaucer, it's impossible unless you train in it. But this, you just get the training. I would take students from SOAS sometimes up to the British Library at one point and show them manuscripts there. And they would marvel at the fact that they could read something from the 9th century, and it would read the same, not just the letters, but also the meaning as well, and the grammar is the same, more or less. The spelling there are slight variations, but nothing that's complicated. Very fortunate. Quite conservative. It's been preserved in that way, rather than, well, they were quite isolated, you see. There's not this thing of other cultures coming in and changing language that we've had in Europe, for instance.
My question is about how do they express? I mean, the leader of Tibet at that time, how do they express their diplomacy relationship with? I think it's Yuan dynasty or the Mongol Empire. How do they express it? Because I think he's the official teacher of the Khan of Mongolian, but that kind of special diplomatic relationship or just a part of the whole Mongolian Empire?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure of the question, but the
Did he act as an ambassador, more or less, of Tibet? Or is
not in a formal sense, no, because there was no formal government of Tibet at that time. That came with Pakpa a little bit, and that was instigated by Kublai Khan. Pakpa, there is a thesis on Pakpa done in Australia, you might find interesting. You can find it online. And how Kublai Khan, when he became emperor, see, most of the time, he became emperor in 1261. Yes, emperor, I call him, 1264. But the Yuan dynasty wasn't really started till later because he hadn't unified China yet. He hadn't conquered China yet. They had the north part, but not the south. It took a huge effort, another 20 odd years or so, to get it unified, to completely defeat the southern Song. And in Tibet, there was no formal government in that way. They were just beginning, they had 200 years of developing these monasteries on the way, but there wasn't, and there were satellite monasteries, like the main one in Serpul, and then the ones in the East Tibet. That was slightly unusual in itself. But it became part of the pattern for Tibet. It didn't really, it wasn't until the next century that you could begin to say that there was a particular leader. Pakpa was posited as the leader. He was appointed by Kublai Khan. But it would be hard, it's difficult to know entirely, but it would be hard to say that he was a real government leader. It's not really until, somebody may disagree, but until the 17th century with the 5th Dalai Lama, to get a more unified idea of Tibet, sort of overall government.
Yes, please.
Marco Polo, is it Karma Pakshi?
It does, you will find it on the internet. That great bastion of truth. But no, there's actually Richardson pointed this out back in the 50s and 60s, that the dates Karma Pakshi left and Marco Polo arrived. Now, it's possibly that Marco Polo's father and uncle may have seen of him and that they reported to Marco Polo. But Marco Polo does mention Tibetan lamas at the court of Kublai Khan performing miracles. And then people assumed, oh, that's Karma Pakshi. But actually, when you look into the dates, there's quite a discrepancy. It's not possible. He also just missed, so to speak, historically, Rubik of the, we call him Belgian, really, French maybe. He'd been sent by the Pope, European monk as well, Franciscan monk, and he'd been sent to Karakoram and spent some time with Mongol, rather unsuccessfully. And he wrote an account as well, and you can read that. And then but he left just 2 years before Karma Pakshi arrived. So unfortunately, there wasn't a meeting there.
Just a commentary on one of the places that you referred to, Markham. Sounds a bit English.
Yes, it's in Gloucestershire. No, it's Markham. Yeah, Mar means lower, and Kham is Kham.
Lower.
So it's Lower Kham. It's a town in Lower Kham. That's all. You're not the first person who's pointed it out. It always has to be an English person. Oh, it's English. No, I haven't invented it.
For the first time, I learned Mankan means lower Kham.
Yes.
Because I was puzzled for a long time because there's some British people who travel in that area wrote about this, but I just don't know the why. Why they call that area lower Kham?
Yes.
So here.
Yes. Yes, the Tibetan names, they often have meaning. Dege is a community of virtue. So at some point it must have got this name.
How accessible are the original, I mean, what would you describe as the earliest extant manuscripts or writings that are complete?
Of Karma Pakshi?
Yes.
Ah,
So, I mean, is this reconstructed from
no,
parts, or is this
no,
all in?
yes. It's, oh, I see. They're not in his original hand. There's not manuscript in that way. It's,
Transcribed,
copies,
yes.
copies, yeah. And
How far do they go back to the first extant? Is there some codex which, like the original?
yeah, I think this memoirs is probably the oldest, but it hasn't been dated because at the moment, I mean, it hasn't been seen since 1978.
Okay.
So it's been in the monastery, and well, it was loaned to be brought. There was no photocopies in 1978. Okay. Yeah. Well, very few anyway, not in India. So it was brought to Delhi, and then they did the photomechanical process, they call it, at the time, and had it copied, and then it was taken back, apparently, but because I've done quite a bit of talking to people in that area, and they did say that sometimes texts were loaned for this process, and then they didn't come back. And I think it did come back because the fellow who told me about the silver writing, he was quite young at the time. I saw him in 1980, so, and he didn't tell me about it then. He was a young fellow then. He told me 20 years later. And so I assume that he saw it when it had come back rather than it disappeared in transit sort of thing. So I assume that it's still in Sikkim. But, and then it could be analyzed, but you can't get in. It's locked up.
How did you, because you said that you were looking at this 1,000-year-old manuscripts in the British Library, so how did they write?
You're going to have to be very diplomatic here. You have quite a few Chinese people. Yeah, it was taken in the early 20th century by Europeans. There was French, British, and German as well. They found them in the caves on the Silk Road, and they'd been hadn't been opened. The caves hadn't been And that's why they're so well preserved. They're in really good condition. You know, I can handle them very easily. The paper's good, and the ink is good as well. Ink deteriorates over the years. It hasn't deteriorated. It's Chinese ink. It hasn't deteriorated. So it's quite extraordinary. But they were taken.
Do they actually seal it into a cave?
Yes, it has been filled into a cave. Yes,
Shows.
yes. We don't.
In some container or?
No, just piled up. You can see the picture. If you look up Pelliot is the French name, P-E-L-L-I-O-T. There's a famous picture of him sitting there with this mountain of scrolls. They were more than text next to him. I think he was working by candlelight. I'm not sure, but he didn't have much time, and you know, he was in a bit of a rush. But they were kind of just lying there, unhildy-pildy. That's why 100 years later, I'm still cataloging. There's been several generations of people trying to get some update.
Must have used some preservation. I mean, in the British libraries, they must be keeping it in very special conditions, not to deteriorate, no?
I can't tell you exactly where.
No, I don't want to know.
Security reasons, but yes, it's in a special room that has. It's made to be like a cave. And in fact, we have to be quite careful telling people that you're going to go down there, because if you happen to get locked in, it's a special contained room. If you happen to get locked in, you probably wouldn't survive. Because they reduce the oxygen and the temperature a little bit, make it very dry. And it seems to survive very well.
So they don't digitalize these things.
Yes, you can find it online. IDP, International Democracy Project. If you just Google IDP PM, it gets you there. And, you can then you have to. It's not a very at the moment. It was an early website, 20 years ago, sort of prehistoric, really. And then they're in the process of updating it now. You know, TEI. But that will take a little bit of time. It's constantly being done. And don't be frustrated if you do log on and it doesn't go through, because we refer to it as grandfather has fallen asleep. Because he does, and then somebody needs to do it, and then it comes alive. So that's why they need to make a new one. But while it's working, it was working this afternoon. You can look at the actual text. It's quite interesting. Not all of them. They're still in the process of composing. They're hoping to finish by the end of March. I'm not sure. So,
Question over here first.
My understand that there are archaeological excavations. They were
Yes.
part of your passport.
yes, there were one. All the stone. Stein is the name of the explorer, the British one. It's okay. S-T-E-I-N.
Was he Hungarian?
Yes, I'm not sure if he was Hungarian. Yeah. Maybe originally.
You mentioned just Tibetan album in Oxford. Is that the Tibetan album is in Peace River Library in
Yes.
Oxford?
Yes.
I've been there.
Oh, have you? Okay.
I want to
I didn't mention that just now.
Tibetan album.
Oh, there was a picture. There was a picture
Yeah.
from the Richardson picture, yes. That's all online. Everything that they have there is, in fact, unless you wanted special permission.
Can I go to the library to see this?
Which library?
Peace River.
Peace River, yes, you have to write to them and ask if you want to see the Tibetan material, the Tibetan album material. But it's been well digitized. I'm not sure whether you would see anything more by actually going there, but you are welcome. It exists for researchers.
So some pictures, only pictures.
Yes, the Tibetan album is pictures. In the pit rivers, they do have some Tibetan items, but they're not terribly interesting. It's a sort of higgledy-piggledy. I think it's not a serious collection. The Ashmolean has quite nice pieces. Yes, Ashmolean, yeah, if you go to Oxford. And they have some nice tankers and some statues and so forth. Yeah. They also, if you find something online that's not on exhibition, you can ask to have it seen. Ask to see it, yes. But you have to make an appointment.
More questions?
Was Karma Pakshi the most prolific writer of all the Karma incarnations?
No, I'd say the eighth command.
Please.
Probably was, yes. Well, it's, as I said, we've got about 40 now. They did say that there was about at least 100 works at one time. There are references back in history. Oh, there's 100 actually works, but either that was an exaggeration or they disappeared.
He did it mostly when he was in exile in the
Yes.
Yunan island.
Yes.
So it's with nothing basically.
Yes, well, in Kucha as well, he started writing. That seems to be where he started writing. Then on the island, a good opportunity to write there. And then I think he also, he doesn't put where he was writing in the codifies, unfortunately. But also, well, certainly poems he wrote, so quite a few of them. And he may well have written the final years in so forth as well. He had about 10 years in very end, so before he died. Yeah, nobody's really studied them much. Everybody, not everybody, but a lot of Tibetan writing refers to him. So great. He's sort of a miracle worker, I suppose, and that's where a lot of the respect comes from. But and they say, oh, it's fantastic, but they don't. As Kapstein remarked, the American scholar, they don't seem to actually read him.
Yeah, it was considered more of a legendary and
Yes.
practice and sadhana more than actually his works. It's
Yeah.
material from him.
Yes, well, that's true. Yes, there's nobody translated much. And well, it's half the volume, so perhaps not. But it's quite curious stuff. He's more the practitioner, sort of putting it all out, right? Not the intellectual, very carefully. Although there was structure to the limitless ocean. From this book comes, and then out of that, this one, and that one. So there's quite a structure.
Dinner time. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. And this has been recorded. I will try to get it onto the SOAS YouTube channel, in which case you would need to probably look at the SCI, SOAS China Institute website in order to find the address. Yes, if you registered through the, there was a registration function, yes? Well, then we should be able to trace you. And, yes. I don't want to promise too much, but we'll try. Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much for a wonderful and very intellectually very fertile lecture tonight. Thank you.